My name is Sarah Begum. I was really interested in my origins, so I took a DNA test. Unable to identify, I must be an alien. So while I'm here on Earth, I'll educate the world on the cosmos, space industry, and projects that benefit humanity. Some say I'm passionate, but I say I'm spaced out. Throughout the years, scientific discoveries have shaped and evolved humanity beyond our wildest imaginations. From the iPhone in your pocket, GPS systems, to artificial limbs and unlocking our understanding of the universe, all of which originated in space. And to quote Stephen Hawking, real science can be far stranger than science fiction and much more satisfying. Joining me today on Spaced Out are two esteemed individuals from NASA. Chief Scientist Dr. Jim Green and Associate Chief Scientist for Microgravity Dr. Tara Ruttley, who will indulge me in a few NASA scientific breakthroughs. Welcome to the show. On February 18th, NASA's Mars Rover Perseverance landed on the Red Planet, and I'm really excited because I reported that the Space Channel and I celebrated for a whole week.
So did I. I'm still celebrating.
Yeah. As the brains behind the science, what are your main objectives for this mission and how are you preparing for it?
Well, this was a spectacular mission. Perseverance is a SUV-sized rover landed on the surface of Mars. In fact, here's Mars as a globe, and this location right here in Syrtis Major, which is right here. This is a volcanic area, but we landed right here on what we would call the ancient shoreline of Mars, because most of this northern hemisphere we believe was underwater, and so consequently, this is a great place to look for past signs of life. Perseverance landed in what we would call a river delta. A river poured down and then hit a still water area, sediments flowed out, and then when the water evaporated over billions of years, and now Mars is very arid, very desert-like, that sediment turned into rock. And so our plan with Perseverance is to go to these areas and then core the rock. In other words, with a drill, spinning drill, be able to go in and create a core. So here's an example of what a core looks like. It's like one of these large Crayola crayons that you can get, or a piece of chalkboard chalk. And this is actually from Perseverance's engineering unit. When I was out at JPL, I had them give me a core from a granite. So I went over to granite rock and bored this hole in it, broke it off, gave it to me. This is what we'll get from these cores. Then we put them in a sleeve. So it's a metal sleeve. And then we drop it on the ground right there for later pickup. We can do as many as 40 or more of these cores. And the importance behind the cores is it gives us the geological record of Mars. Mars went through enormous climate change. It was an environment at the beginning of its life like Earth with plenty of water. It was a blue planet like the Earth is today. But somewhere along the line, its evolution really changed it into this arid, dry world, as I mentioned. If we can get indications from the rock record, Mars had past life.
What type of life forms are you expected to find or discover through this mission? And the other is, If Mars was a blue planet and now it's a red planet and it's similar to our Earth, do you think that the same could happen to our planet from climate change, from the effects of climate change? And if so, the other confusing thing is, why are we heading to Mars if life is on Earth and Mars is now an arid desert, which I'm just confused. Can you please help me understand?
Well, actually, the thread that you just said is the right way to think about it. We are so lucky in our solar system to have planets like Venus, Earth, and Mars. They are at different locations from the sun. They are large, solid bodies, and they have evolved over time differently. And the difference is significant. Venus is an Earth-sized planet, but it has a very harsh climate. It has huge temperatures. It's a very volcanic planet. The pressure on the surface of Venus is 90 times our own pressure. It's really crushing. And it's because it has an abundance of greenhouse gases. So by studying the planets, which are at different locations around the sun, there are different parts of their evolution, we're realizing that what's happening on Venus can happen on Earth. What's happening on Mars can happen at Earth. It's what is the evolutionary track of Earth? And we only understand that by studying these other planets. And so doing that, going into space, studying these planets is really critical for an understanding of what will happen on Earth next.
So do you think we'll turn into Venus or Mars?
Well, right now, we're moving into a hotter climate. Climate change on Earth is a major discussion. I'm a planetary scientist, so when I look at the evolution of the climate of the Earth, I look at it over its whole period of since it was created about 4.6 billion years ago. So what I can tell you is the climate has done nothing but change. So what will it change into? And right now, we're moving into a hotter environment. We're going to be more Venus-like than Mars-like.
Join me for more Spaced Out right after the break. Welcome back to Spaced Out. Okay, so what is the benefit of going to Mars for humans colonizing Mars and leaving Earth?
Well, we do want to go to Mars. We do want to be able to learn to live and work on a planetary surface and set up a base, make all sorts of discoveries. And it's not like we want everybody from Earth to move to Mars. The concept is we're moving out into the solar system. We are the first species on this planet with the ability to leave it and go out into space. Why don't we do that? Because we have that huge gene in us that wants to know things, that wants to explore, that wants to discover. And we think Mars holds a whole series of secrets that we would like to know about. For instance, did life start on another planet besides Earth? Mars might be able to tell us that. Answer that question.
Can you tell me a secret? Can you share with me some exclusive information from the Perseverance mission? Please?
Yeah, sure, of course. Perseverance has landed, and it's already started to make a variety of measurements. Now, what we find is that it is measuring a variety of what we call basaltic material. Basaltic is melted rock that then has moved and been transported to the area it's at, because the volcanoes are actually very far away. So whether the volcanoes were very active and threw material into the location where Perseverance is at, called Jezero Crater, or it went into the lake or water which brought it there, we can't tell at the moment. But that's just one of the mysteries that we've started to find, and then we'll try to untangle it.
How big are the teams working with you on this mission?
Well, there's probably 300 scientists worldwide that are involved in analyzing data from not only Curiosity, there's a huge set there, but also Perseverance. Now, we have two big rovers on Mars right now.
And what's your biggest desire, a mission as the chief scientist of NASA, and especially for this mission?
Well, I want to bring the rock record back. That's what we're currently planning. When we drop these sample tubes off on the ground, we then want to go around with another mission, collect them, put them into a Mars ascent vehicle, have that lofted into space, and that set of samples captured and then brought back to Earth. And once they're in our laboratory, then we can really tease out what's happening. For instance, there are 5,000 or so minerals on Earth. You walk around, you pick up a rock, you look at the mineralogy of the rock, that means its composition, how it's put together. And out of that 5,000, 300 or more of the minerals that we see on Earth can only be made under the conditions of life. And so that rock record will tell us how the climate changed, but also perhaps can tell us if life started on Mars too. And that's why it's important to bring this rock record back.
I hope it happens soon, and I would love to see us colonize Mars as well. I want to be there as well. Do you think that we would be growing forests on Mars?
I really like that question. And the reason why is there's some research being done right now in Japan. This research is all about what does it take, at what temperature and pressure can we grow trees? And that means as humans start to go to Mars, learn to live and work, and that climate will change because of human influence, we expect the temperature of the planet to rise. And there'll come a point where we can grow trees. The question then is, does Mars have the soils to be able to sustain that? And we think it does.
Oh.
So it has all the right stuff. And yes, Mark Watney could grow potatoes on Mars.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, right now where Curiosity is at, we know a lot about the soils. And the soils have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. That's all the right stuff. It has nitrates in the soils, and the soils are moist. Nitrates are important fertilizer. So although, we would bring the plants, you'd also have to bring, the other things and, a significant amount of fertilizer still. And in the area where Curiosity is, we could grow beans and asparagus because the soils are alkaline, But we're assuming that there'll also be areas on Mars where the soils are more acidic, where potatoes could grow. Yeah, so these are really important concepts that you're bringing up. You're thinking about them.
But I think that aliens are giving me this information because I've got another one. So for the Martian samples that you'll retrieve, would you be able to collect enough soil from Mars to try and grow trees on Earth using Martian soil? So then with another spacecraft mission, you can send that back and just plant trees on Mars before we get there so that we can breathe on Mars.
Well,
I'm a genius.
That's an interesting approach. We won't ever be able to bring enough of that material back. But what we will be able to do is analyze it to the point of knowing what the composition is, and then be able to create what we call simulants. That means we're going to simulate the soils of Mars by developing exactly the composition that we measure. Now, simulants are really important, and here's a simulant in this jar of Mars dust. Okay?
Oh, you live with the stuff, literally. You're surrounded by your samples.
This is our best understanding of the composition of the Mars dust. Now, we also have composition of lunar dust, and this is a nice little hourglass that the Japanese Space Agency put together. Did a really nice job. So here is lunar dust, and here's Mars dust. And you can see when I flip it over like this, that the lunar dust is smaller, so you get a bigger pile quicker, and so we compare properties between these materials so that we understand what we can do with them. For instance, can we use them in 3D printers? What can we make with dust from the moon if we go there and live and work, which our plans are to indeed do, and then go to Mars? So those are all important research areas that we're working on.
Join me for more Spaced Out right after the break. Welcome back to Spaced Out. When humans head to Mars, we need to know what challenges we face. What studies have you undertaken with astronauts on long-term space missions to understand the unexpected ways that the human body changes in microgravity?
So that's the million-dollar question, right? Obviously, the whole reason we go to the moon and Mars, we're planning this stuff, is to send humans. So we have had about 20 years of research on the International Space Station where we've been able to look at what we call adaptations to the space environment when we talk about the human body. So just about any system you can think of in the human body is affected by the gravity environment. I mean, that's how we evolved. We evolved under 9.81 meters per second squared. So when you take us out of that environment, all bets are off. Things change, things adapt. It's just the body's way of using it or losing it. So things like bone and muscle have been a really big challenge for us over the last couple of decades of spaceflight. And only now on the International Space Station have we been able to find ways to develop countermeasures, what we call countermeasures or fixes for bone and muscle loss. Think about it, in space, you're not walking around under gravity. There's no reason to really use your bones and a whole lot of muscles, so you'll lose those capabilities. But what we found on the station is if we have the right kind of resistive exercise and cardiovascular exercise with the right loads, and if our astronauts eat all their calories and all their nutrition and they take their big doses of vitamin D, then we've been able to mitigate both bone and muscle loss. And that's huge. I mean, think about it. A 9-month trip to Mars, you're in microgravity. What are you going to do when you get there? You're going to step out onto the surface, and the last thing you want to do is break a hip, break a bone. So we have plans now. We're working on ways to keep the bones and muscles healthy on the way to Mars so that we're healthy when we get there. But the heart is another part of the system that's affected too. The heart is a muscle, it's a pump, and it doesn't have to pump so hard against microgravity. So again, we need those exercise countermeasures. The immune system is affected. In fact, it looks like it behaves in ways that are similar to what we see in the aging populations on Earth. The neurovestibular or the balance system is affected, and even the eyes are affected. We're learning more and more about how the fluid pressure is probably contributing to some eye changes that we see in our astronauts in space. So all the systems are pretty much affected. We have been doing lots of different scientific studies over the last 20 years to try to solve these problems, and I think we're making a whole lot of good progress there. And now what we mostly are looking at and what the Human Research Program is looking at NASA now, as we're thinking about going beyond low Earth orbit, are adaptations or how the body responds in 5 different environments. And that is radiation, that's the topmost one, isolation. So we look at things like behavioral health and socialization between the crew, the distance from Earth, and knowing that the farther you get from Earth, the longer it is to get back. It's an obvious thing, right? Gravity, the effects of gravity, which I just talked about, and the effects of an extreme environment. Things like in the future, how the effects of the dust on the lungs and things like that. So the Human Research Program at NASA is super, super busy, and not just at NASA, with all of our international partners, trying to solve these problems of what we call adaptations to the body in space. You know, I would say, Sarah, I often think of it like this. We evolved and we look the way we do, we are built the way we do because of gravity. And it makes me think that when you take that gravity vector away, like we see our astronauts on the station, their faces become puffy. because of all the fluid shifts, and their legs become wiry like bird legs. And it always makes me think of those alien depictions you see. It's right, like the alien depictions you see in sci-fi, the big eyes and the big head and the lower wiry body.
Yeah.
You can kind of see how that could possibly be when you talk about these different gravity environments. I knew you'd like that.
Yeah. I always actually had this theory that we adapt, our physical body adapts to the immediate environment. And I've seen that, I've been a witness to that from the different terrains that I've traveled to and lived with.
Right.
People and their direct relationship with the environment has a huge impact on their physical body, on their physiognomy, their resilience to various weather climates. It's so interesting. It's just so interesting to see.
It's scientific and philosophical, isn't it? It's a mix of both.
That's the bridge that I've been walking on recently.
Right.
Between philosophy and science, and it's all related. And I've been studying Einstein's theories, and it's just so interesting. It's so interesting how everything's connected. Everything is just connected. I didn't think I'd be having this conversation with scientists. I'm so glad you understand.
Oh yeah, and think of all the things we can't measure yet because we haven't developed the tools to do that. We know the tools that scientists create are just extensions of us. And so eventually we'll all get there and all this will come together and maybe one day we'll know everything, right?
Exactly. Oh gosh. What about the 3D printing? How does 3D printing and microgravity work? When will we see it happen? And what kind of products are we expected to see it create?
Well, good news is we've already sent a 3D printer to space. It's sitting on the space station right now, mostly driven by the fact that we send out thousands of parts every year. We store thousands of parts, pounds of parts on orbit every year, and then we send thousands back, and that's a waste of resources. So you can imagine what that might be like to go beyond low Earth orbit, where you can't even easily go up and down so well. So in 2014, we sent up the first 3D printer. It was sent to station as a technology test, and it was developed by a company called Made in Space. And this printer used the typical fused filament fabrication process. This is just the laying down of a continuous thread of heated ABS plastic layer by layer to make a 3D part. The machine had been slightly modified a little bit to kind of hold in place anything that could float. So there was that modification, but really what they leveraged was the dominant force of surface tension, because in microgravity, where gravity vector is not the dominant force anymore, it becomes surface tension. So the surface tension was leveraged in how they printed on station, and they ended up just being very successful by uploading many different designs and then printing them on station. We've got a whole catalog of parts that were printed. So we had such great success. We got the samples back, investigated the materials and the strength and all the things that you need for materials. That looked great. So now that's permanently on ISS, and it's becoming closer and closer to becoming a real operational tool. We have printed actual tool parts on there.
We'll be back with more Spaced Out, but first, our Spaced Out Trivia Challenge. The ISS is the single most expensive object ever built, but what is the price tag? The answer when we come back. Welcome back to Spaced Out. The ISS has been estimated at over $120 billion. What an amazing feat of human engineering. Now, back to Spaced Out. What was the very first thing that this 3D printer on the ISS printed?
So the very first thing that the 3D printer on the station printed was, drum roll, a replacement part for the printer. Why not, right? It was an important part that surrounded the extruder, protected the extruder, and that was the first thing that was printed. And then eventually, one of the last things that got printed was a wrench that could be used if needed on space station. I actually think one of the cooler things that came after that particular printer was a bioprinter, a 3D bioprinter. So here on Earth, we do 3D bioprinting to try to make replacement parts for the human body, things like tissues or knee cartilage and such. But they're so delicate, and they have to be made so specifically. It's a challenge. They just kind of fall into a puddle if they're not done right. So on space station, we sent up one that could 3D print human tissues potentially, or human cells, because we are leveraging the microgravity environment for that, being able to have parts that won't simply collapse on themselves when we're testing them in the microgravity environment. So this particular printer is called the Biofabrication Facility, and it uses bio inks. It's a low viscosity ink of a mix of whatever tissue types or cell types you want to print that tissue into. And this was sent up by a company called TechShot, a small business, and that was, I think, in 2019. And they've been experimenting with this ever since. And they have actually been able to make, so far, they've printed knee cartilage and a very large mass of human heart cells. So they've been very, very successful there. And so that's another example of doing stuff in microgravity that you couldn't otherwise really do easily in the gravity environment. You take that gravity vector away, and as a scientist, you get to see all kinds of new and fun things.
Oh, wow. Well, you have these body parts printed and maybe on ice, available for the people living on Mars, so that if needed through surgery for whatever reason, they could replace those parts, or they could 3D print those parts.
Absolutely. In the long run, we hope to get there someday, and we're taking the baby steps. But for the first time, we're actually able to do this in space, and so we're making really great progress. Yeah, you've got a great way of thinking. Absolutely. The long-term mission is human sustainability on another planet.
I have this crazy idea. It's kind of science fiction, but why not? What if we 3D print what's closest to a human being and send that on a spacecraft mission to enter the orbit of these other planets, exoplanets, for example, and see how they survive, and make that 3D printed human robot responsive to the occurrences and the changes that they experience on that planet. It's kind of scary. It scares me saying it. Well, I don't know what's coming out of me.
Well, your thought process in this is similar to what NASA thought about many years ago when we launched first the Pioneer spacecraft that actually would fly by the giant planets like Jupiter and Saturn, and then have enough energy to actually leave the gravitational influence of the sun and go out into the area between the stars. And so a big effort was made to try to put some sort of communication to whoever would find this spacecraft on who the inventors were. And so on Pioneer 10 and 11, these were plaques, and the plaques had images of the planets, images of showing the spacecraft, and then next to the spacecraft is a man and a woman, so you could get the size of a man and a woman, and then from the planets a trajectory that goes from the Earth by Jupiter and then out into space, so they understood where this man and a woman about the size of the spacecraft came from in our solar system. So that's what's communicated in the plaque. And then for the Voyagers, Carl Sagan developed a golden record of sounds and also images in digital form.
Wait, I remember this.
Yeah, so that's the Voyager golden record. Yeah. And that's on Voyager 1 and 2.
Where is it now?
Well, Voyager 1 and 2 have just left what we call the heliopause. So they're on a trajectory to completely leave the influence of the gravity of the sun, but they're far enough away right now that they're actually measuring winds from other stars. And so that's about 130 to 135 astronomical units away from us. where 1 astronomical unit is the distance between us and the sun.
Wow. That's incredible. I love it. So Jim, you showed me the samples of lunar dust and the dust from the Martian atmosphere. I'm wondering if that could be turned into a filament for the 3D printer, and if so, what would you print?
Very good question, because we have these simulants, we actually can run them through 3D printers and try to figure out what their utility would be, because the dust is all over the place on the moon. The dust is in many places on Mars. It's not completely ubiquitous, but it is indeed a ready resource. And we believe we can use it in many different ways. In fact, being able to print panels that can be used to build a structure that will help fend off radiation, or be able to be strong enough that you then can pile more material or regolith on top of it, and then provide added protection. The regolith is also could be used for printing a variety of parts or pieces. Indeed, 3D printing is just such a critical technology. When you think about being at a location, having a piece of hardware, it breaks, there's a piece in it that needs to be fixed, getting the plans of the interior of that device from the Earth, being able to then extract what you need out of those plans, go to a 3D printer and reproduce the part and put it in. And even if it works for a while and breaks, you can always make another one because you have a readily supply of the material around you in terms of lunar dust or in terms of Mars regolith. So 3D printing is going to be a real critical capability to keep all kinds of infrastructure, hardware, and mechanisms working for us and providing, as I mentioned, even protection against the environment.
Imagine that, structures on the moon, buildings, houses, like all kinds of stuff. Like I can just, my mind boggles.
Well, NASA, about 1.5 years ago, ran a competition in terms of having a number of companies that have a variety of 3D printing systems to 3D print a structure, something that then we could use the local resources and then build a structure. And then that competition was tremendously successful. Several companies built some really spectacular looking structures. One was selected as the winner. That structure enabled the minimum use of material, but the maximum space that was created. And so you can get on the web and look at many of these results from that contest alone. Very exciting approach to developing habitats.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Spaced Out right after this. Welcome back to Spaced Out. So I'm interested to know, where is NASA going next? So what will be the next scientific breakthroughs for NASA in the future? Can you please enlighten me on what we're expected to see?
Well, let me talk about it in this way. NASA has a number of scientific disciplines, all right? Tara will be the expert in life sciences and biology, and we're doing a number of new things in that area on Space Station. In the area of heliophysics, we're actually studying the sun in new and unique ways and really be able to launch spacecraft that right now are interrogating the sun closer than we've ever been before. The Parker Solar Probe is doing that right now, making really close passes. That's telling us where on the sun we believe the wind, the outgassing from the sun, occurs in the upper part of the atmosphere. We call that the solar wind. The sun constantly outgasses. And so where is that coming from? Why is that happening? And that mission is really tackling some of those really great problems and understanding that. From a planetary science perspective, we're getting ready now to launch a mission to the beautiful moon Europa. Now, Europa is about the size of our own moon, orbits Jupiter, and it is what we call an ocean world. It has an icy crust, and underneath that icy crust is an enormous ocean. In fact, we believe there's more than twice the amount of water in the Europa ocean than there is on this planet alone. And yet that body is only the size of our own moon. So that's an important mission that we're moving towards. In the area of astrophysics, a seminal telescope is about ready to be launched this year. It's called the James Webb Space Telescope. Now, the Webb telescope is absolutely enormous, has this enormous mirror, many times the size of the Hubble mirror, and that's going to peer into the universe, looking for when the early indications of how the universe progressed right after the Big Bang to make stars and then eventually galaxies in that area of unknown time period that we have had so much difficulty trying to understand. And it has the ability to do that. And that mission will be launched by our partner, the European Space Agency. And then in Earth science, we have a whole series of new missions that have been launched. We're now looking at the vegetation, the water cycle. We have instruments in Earth science that are going to be installed on space station. We're looking at carbon dioxide, where it's being generated, how it moves throughout our atmosphere, and how it affects our climate. And so there's just a litany of really important missions that are coming up in NASA.
So if this is how the universe was created and we were created as a result of it, are there other life forms beyond this solar system that maybe we could discover with the right tools? For example, the right spacecrafts and the right can we have miniature scientific missions aboard these spacecrafts on interstellar missions to see if we can further our understanding of other life forms beyond what we already know?
Right. Well, that is indeed what we want to do.
Yeah.
Okay. We'd love to be able to do that. And so we're doing that in what I would call a stepwise fashion based on our ability. So the first part to that is we're looking for life beyond Earth. And we do that first in the solar system with spacecraft. We also do that with telescopes and even telescopes in space to look beyond our solar system, looking for planets around other stars. So, in my lifetime, in the 1990s, for instance, we started to see our first planets around other stars. Now we've had spacecraft go up and do the same thing using a variety of techniques. And based on that set of data from a spacecraft called Kepler, we now know there are more planets in our galaxy than there are stars. So this is what we would say bodes well for the concept that maybe some of those planets are habitable to the point where they may have and harbor intelligent life. We don't know that, but we're working hard to try to figure out how to interrogate planets that we find that are Earth-sized to really understand if they are habitable with intelligent life.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Spaced Out right after this. Welcome back to Spaced Out. I wanted to know what inspired you both to become a scientist, and how did you end up working for NASA, and what are your dreams now in your roles or in your lives?
what really got me excited was I had an opportunity to work in an observatory. So I worked with a telescope, a large telescope, a 12-inch Alvin Clark refractor, built instruments for it, did astrophotography, developed my own film. I even had some things published in Sky and Telescope. And this is when I was in high school. So that after I left high school, went into the University of Iowa, I ended up working with James Van Allen, who is our very first top scientist in space. He was on Explorer 1 and discovered the Van Allen radiation belts. So I had a number of really important and inspirational teachers, both in high school and at the university, that really got me excited about the field I'm in. I've had a tremendous career at NASA. I was very lucky right after I left the University of Iowa. I had many job offers, actually two at NASA, one at Goddard Space Flight Center and another one at Marshall Space Flight Center. And I first went to Marshall, worked there for 5 years, and then I ended up at Goddard Space Flight Center for another 20 years before I came down to NASA headquarters. But I've just had a spectacular career and really have enjoyed all the NASA activities I've gotten involved in.
And what's your dream now?
Okay. Well, my dream would be that we retrieve these samples on Mars, bring them back, interrogate them, and find evidence for past life on Mars. That's a real game changer. Because if we can find evidence of life in another location beyond Earth, then that means life is everywhere in the universe, in different places in our solar system, but also all over our galaxy.
What about you, Tara?
Well, I knew since third grade that I wanted to work at NASA because I grew up a kid in the 80s where we had the space shuttle launches, and what they were doing in the payload bay of the space shuttle was science experiments, floating water, flames, people spinning in chairs, looking at changes in the human body. So I knew that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to work at NASA, and people told me I needed to go into engineering and if I wanted to work at NASA. And I was just inspired by the human body, especially because of really great high school teachers who taught physiology. No engineer builds the human body. That's completely by nature. And so that's what got me going and got me inspired in science. So I went to college. I got my undergraduate degree in biology. But while I was there, I had to work with a group of mechanical engineering students to design an idea I had for an exercise machine in space. And working with them, I got to learn the equipment and the machines and all that. And then when it came time to graduate, they talked me into applying to a master's degree program in mechanical engineering. And I was like, no, I'm not going to be an engineer. I'm not. But they talked me into it. And even though I wanted to get my PhD in neuroscience, I took a second and I went, you know what? Yeah, I'll do this mechanical engineering degree. So I ended up getting a master's in mechanical engineering. And right before I was done about to graduate, I had submitted my resume to NASA, who was in a hiring freeze, but they called me anyway and said, hey, we need you, someone with both those backgrounds, to come and work for us in a new division inside the engineering directorate called the Biomedical Systems Division. And we need you to come make exercise equipment and medical equipment for the space station. So I'm not saying no to that. As a permanent NASA position, I ran to Houston and started to work as an engineer at NASA. And that's where I got to roll up to every day, the big rockets at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, where I was an engineer for 8 years, but I concurrently got my PhD in neuroscience and then moved over to the space station science office, where we were a tiny little science nerd organization in a big engineering vehicle organization. And it was our job to communicate and about the science on station and make sure the science got done. And that's where I stayed for 10 years until I moved up here 2 years ago to work with Jim at NASA headquarters in DC. So it's been quite a ride. I've had a blast. This is the dream career, more than I could have ever imagined. And what's next for me, I hope, is to make it to low Earth orbit someday, or maybe even the moon. I'd like to go to space, so I'm still working on it.
So I was interested to know what non-linear approaches we can take to get young people excited about space and STEM careers, because we want to trigger the next generation to expand upon the groundbreaking work you're doing today. So how could we do that? Would it be YouTube and podcasts and using these new types of mediums to get them excited? Or do you have any personal opinions on how we could shape that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is you need to meet the students where they are. I have a middle schooler and she is online right now because her life is virtual. And content creation for that kind of age group that is relevant to space is really, really important. There are kids who love space, and to be able to give them the voice to pull their peers in and entertain their peers is important, as well as the creation of more space movies for the younger generation. A lot of the space movies that are created these days are for the older audience, but we need to maybe get down to the lower levels and introduce these students. I mean, Space Camp the movie was a dream for me, and that kept me going because I was young when that came out. So meeting the students where they are, content that's engaging. NASA is naturally engaging, and by itself, students love space and dinosaurs. That was me, right? But where do they go when they've lost that interest, and why did they go? That's what we talk about. So Jim, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, you're exactly right. In fact, we'd like to do a variety of things in middle school in particular, where we think some of those decisions are made where minorities that are coming up may get discouraged. We want to be able to figure out how to encourage them, get that engaging content, and then continue on as they go through middle school and then into high school. So science literacy is incredibly important for NASA, and we're devoting some significant amount of time to do these things.
So thank you so much. I understand you're super busy changing the world and the universe, so I'll let you go back to your work. I'm so grateful for your time. Thank you so much for being on Spaced Out with me. Make sure to join the flight crew. Subscribe to our newsletter for the latest news, launch alerts, exclusive merchandise, and more. Until our next space adventure, I'm Sarah Bagan for Space Channel.
Na na na.